Welcome. This is the Drupal usability meeting for October 8th, 2021. I'm Benji Fisher, sharing my screen and moderating, and also on the call are Aaron McHale, Antonia, Clayton, Alfer Schall, Paolo Henri Cota Starling, and Thomas Howell. So a good mix of backend developers, front-end developers, designers, and do we have anyone who considers themselves a site builder? Um, if it's easier for you for any reason to type rather than talk, I have the chat window open. I keep an eye on it. I'll read your comments um, into the issue, into the recording rather. But Clayton apparently has audio problems. Could someone mention in chat that he's invited to? Thanks. So let's see. Last week we got through a bunch of issues that had previously been suggested in the Slack channel. There is one left over. New translations for moderated nodes are not created in the initial workflow state. It's one we've looked at before, and after some progress on the issue, we've been asked to take another look at the current status. And I guess there was also a suggestion several weeks ago that we more regularly review the ideas issue queue. I've noted a few issues on that have been active lately. One of them is better wording of the module lifecycle admin pages. So that's specifically the wording related to installing and uninstalling and I guess configuring modules. So that's something we could look at. And I see that Thomas Howell has also joined. Thank you. But shall we start with the one for moderated nodes? This is issue 3150294. Any objections before we dive into this one, or objections or other comments? Hearing none. So if you have a bunch of workflow states, typically draft, needs review, and published, and a couple of roles, if you enable the content moderation and content translation modules, add another site so that enabling content translation actually has some effect. And enable the editorial workflow for a translatable content type, then you can configure some transitions, draft to draft, draft to needs review to draft, and needs review to published. I think if an author creates a node in English and sets it to need review, and then adds a translation for the node, the question is whether the translated node should have the current state, the current moderation state of the original, or whether it should go into the default moderation state, which is usually draft. And I think the current state is broken, that they get some sort of error message when they try to save the translation. And then the question is, should we just allow it to be saved in the state it's trying to save it in, or should we change the state it's saved in? So Clayton, I see you've quit and we rejoined. Can you hear us now?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're kind of faint, but I can hear you.
Great.
So let's see. And Lee Rowlands, or L.A. Rowland, commented a week ago on a bunch of questions. So I guess at this point it's down to they've decided on the new setting and they're still wondering about the best UI. So let's go back to the issue summary and see what the proposed resolution is. So the proposed resolution is to preserve the existing behavior for backwards compatibility, but add a configuration option when defining a workflow. And the new option will only be visible in the case that both content moderation and content translation are enabled. The first option is to have a simple toggle for the current behavior versus using the default moderation state. And the user interface would just be a checkbox. They'd have to worry about the wording. And the setting is a Boolean to be decided. And the suggested user interface is shown in a screenshot here, but just a text version of a checkbox. New translations use default moderation state with the explanation, if not checked, new translations will use the current state of the default revision. The big problem with this approach is that folks configuring a workflow wouldn't have any idea what happens if they don't select the box, unless there's the description to accompany it. And so option B is that the backend is the same. It's actually a Boolean, but instead of a single checkbox, have two radio buttons. I'm sorry. So the setting is stored as a string, and in some user interfaces, explicit radios for different options can be more clear than a checkbox if each choice requires a little explanation. So I'm not sure that's that option is up to date, but the example UI shows moderation states for new translations, one option default moderation state, and the other option is current moderation state of the default revision. And then there's a screenshot showing the existing option, what the default moderation state is. It's usually draft, and then the new radio buttons. So an actual screenshot. So I wish people working on the issue had done a little more work in updating the issue summary. But let's look at the questions that L.A. Rowland is addressing and see whether we agree with him. So one, which UI is best for the setting? I personally think the radio options is more descriptive, but he'll defer to the UX team. Do we need an upgrade path? That's not a usability question. Do we want to add the setting to default workflows shipped with core? Does it need a CR? Need more test coverage? Default values? I guess the rest of those questions are not related to usability. So we're really back to the question that I think we've talked about before. What user interface to use for the two options. And let me see if I can find a comment from one of us. Here we go, and we commented before. So here's the recommendation we made the last time we talked about it in comment 23 on the issue. If it's a Boolean option on the workflow configuration page, we preferred the checkbox option.
I think it take everyone some time to wrap around our head with like the specific use case of what is happening and how. It's a complex one.
So I guess they're basically asking us to reconsider the recommendation we gave before, which I did say it was a small meeting, and I did say to consider it a recommendation rather than something we'd insist on. So I guess that's the choice we're being asked, whether to have the 2 radio buttons or the single checkbox. And the argument in favor of the radio buttons is that it gives an opportunity to describe what happens when the option is not selected, whereas a checkbox only has a description of what happens if it is selected. So questions, any clarification needed, or do people have an opinion on which of the 2 options to use?
I like what you just said. I think it's true. I see it clearly. I don't know, maybe it's in other places, but in comment 22, where they show the 2 options, A and B, and I feel that when it's written in 2-line as a radio button, it's very clear. You don't need to think complex of what would happen. The whole sentence is structured much better and simple to know if I click here, that's what I'm getting. If I click at the other option, that's what I'm getting.
Okay, so you agree with having the 2 radio buttons rather than the single checkbox?
Yeah.
Okay. Other opinions?
Yeah, I think like kind of agree with that. When I look at from option A, it's a little bit, I don't know, it feels a little wordy, like trying to cram it all into one line, whereas it feels a little bit more explicit with like having the from option B there, the sort of like radio buttons. So my gut feeling is that probably option B there is, I see there's an option C, it doesn't have an example, it seems, but yeah, like having the 2 radio buttons feels a bit more explicit and conveys the information a bit better, I think, in this case.
I agree. I think option B is the most intuitive.
Okay.
Reading the actual text now of the radio button, I just think the second option still sounds, at least to me, I'm like, what? I need to read it a few times or something, because it says I'm choosing moderation state for new translations. One is default moderation state. The second is current moderation state of the default revision. And I don't know if there is any way to simplify it, but it sounds a little complex.
Okay, and in chat, Paolo has mentioned that he also prefers option B, so I think we're developing a consensus on that. I also want to say that a few more people have joined the meeting. So Keith and Gabrielle Almeida. So for people new to the meeting, if you'll add your Drupal.org username either in the UX channel in Slack or in the chat on this Zoom call, then I can give you issue credit for today's meeting, for attending today's meeting. And thanks for joining us.
Yeah, hi, thank you. And option B definitely seems to be one that makes a bit more sense looking at that.
Okay, that sounds like a consensus. So I guess we can now spend a little time thinking on the wording of the two radio buttons. I think I said something about that in an earlier comment. Yeah, number 23 near the bottom, I said my personal suggestion is that, that was a suggestion for the checkbox option. And I was suggesting using an imperative statement. And I wonder whether that same thing might apply to the radio buttons. So for the checkbox, I was suggesting use the default moderation state for new translations. And I guess that wouldn't quite work for the two radio buttons.
Benji, on comment 26, you have an example of new language for the radio buttons.
Oh, good for me.
Yeah.
So yeah, my suggestion was initial moderation state when adding a new translation. First option, default moderation state. Second option, current moderation state of the original language.
It does feel a bit like, I feel like it would be better if we could get away from the word default, because that, and maybe it's just because we're not looking at it in the context of what the UI is going to be, but to me, I'm sort of, I feel like default moderation state could kind of throw some people as to what that exactly refers to.
But that context is important, and it's in this screenshot. So
that okay, right, that makes more sense.
And it looks as though the screenshot adopted my suggested language. So yeah, the new radio buttons come right below the drop-down list for default moderation state. So I think in that context, default moderation state is as clear as it can be.
Yes, now that I see the option directly above it, that's a lot clearer. And do in this context, do we know what original language would be? Presumably that would just be is that the language that the content was published in first, or
Yeah, and right above that, there's a text version of the options that instead of original language says default revision. So what we're trying to get at is when you're translating a node, you have the original language version of the node, which I guess is referred to as the default revision. And then you have the translated version of that node. And we're trying to come up with the best way to describe the default revision, which maybe we should just use default revision, which is sort of the official name for it. But maybe that's sort of technical, and we can come up with something clearer.
Yeah, I think if we don't, like, default revision sounds a bit ambiguous if it's not referred to elsewhere in the user interface. Like, so that would be my only concern with that.
So how about instead of initial moderation state when adding a new translation, what if we changed that line to initial moderation state when translating a node? Can you say node?
You can, but you have to, technically gets a bit, well, I guess it's not hard to do. You can, yeah, you can. You just take the plural, the singular of whatever the entity type annotation has.
When translating existing content?
Is it way too simplified if we just rephrase it like as initial moderation state for translations or content translation?
Initial moderation state for translations.
Is that
But then how do you describe that second option?
current moderation state of the original content? Initial moderation state when adding content translations. Might not be clear enough.
I think that the new keyword in there is probably important.
Current, how about just saying instead of the original language, the original content?
I like that.
I like that too. Yeah.
Would original, I guess, like with default, would original content, would that make sense to someone just seeing this for the first time? Would they know what original content means?
So keep in mind that this is an admin form for someone configuring the workflow settings.
Right.
So this is a site administrator, not a content editor.
Okay.
And so a certain familiarity with Drupal is reasonable to assume.
Oh, right. This isn't on the on the node or the entity itself. So
right, this is for configuring workflow settings.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, I would understand that. Putting myself in that situation.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess I can comment on this issue, and the consensus is in favor of what's in this screenshot. The two radio buttons and a suggestion, but other suggestions are possible for the wording, but just changing language to content is probably a step in the right direction. And of course, if anyone has ideas after the meeting, feel free to comment on the issue. There's a link to it on the usability issue for today's meeting, and Offer also copied that link into the chat if you want to bring it up yourself. So let's move on to another issue. Since a few people joined in the middle of that discussion, do you have any issues you'd like to bring up?
Benji, I asked about it before, just in general, Drupal now getting more traction. I wanted to know what's the best way that I can get feedback on how the extension display information or ask for information. Are there things I can prepare? Is it ready as is now to look at it, or would you like me to prepare certain things so then we can look at it?
Yeah, so would you like me to stop sharing my screen and you can take over and we can talk about that?
Sure, that'll be awesome.
Okay. Go ahead. And Antonia asked me in chat whether I meant to share my whole screen. I thought I was sharing just the Firefox window. Is that what people saw?
I think
We
I
saw a lot more.
Oh, I didn't even think that was possible.
I
Oh,
am
well.
sharing my whole screen because I want you to see the pop-up messages. Do you see my screen?
Yep.
We do.
Yes.
But I only see the one window.
Yeah. It's just I'm sharing a whole screen because otherwise pop-up wouldn't show up.
Okay.
The amount of toolbar buttons you have makes me a little anxious. Much like the amount of windows that I could see on Benji's desktop made me a little anxious.
Sorry, I didn't mean to trigger anyone.
Yes, as soon as I share my screen, my computer goes to speed 0. Like what? Just open a link. Okay, here we go. So if anyone's familiar, Drupal is helping people to do contribution. The way that it currently is used is you would go to any Drupal.org issue page after you install the browser extension. And when installing the extension, I hope it's big enough. There's not much I can do to make it bigger. But this is the display that people get now. And what I want to know is I think there's a lot of improvements that can be done here. But if this group can give more suggestions of what should be prioritized and how to make things very clear, eventually I think this, instead of a pop-up, would actually be implemented in a page, first by the extension, hopefully later as officially part of Drupal.org. Yeah, so one more things I want to show here, that for places that don't have a fork, but we can talk about that. Let me just check quickly that I have an example. Because the extension know how to work with both patches and or issue forks.
And Alfer, I think Drupal.org already has Tugboat integration to generate a site with the patch applied. And the big difference is that DrupalPod does that, but also gives you a development environment where you can do further edits on the patches. Is that right?
Yes and no. So yesterday I was just checking Keith's issue about adding a new recipe to Umami, and I tried using Tugboat link. And let me show you. I think it's here. And then I guess Tugboat has a limit option, so it doesn't let you do certain things. And then I got a Drupal installed, but not Umami. So I was like, okay, can't really use that. I think it was here. Nope, it must be the other one. I thought it was here, but anyway, so that was my experience, that there were no options to say, please give me Drupal, but with Umami. But in general, I guess we're trying to achieve kind of similar things of, by going to a Drupal.org issue, you'll be able to test things, update things, make changes, and all because you're getting a full environment. Sorry for going all over, checking if we have here issue fork, because I think we do. Okay, you can see it here a little bit more. One of the things I tried to do, but it's a little messy, is you see at the bottom of my screen, it says get push access. When you start issue forks on issues, which would allow you to just use Git when you, as a developer, there are certain things you have to do in the Drupal.org interface. So I tried here in the pop-up to display some kind of a text of these are, if you want, that's the text that I guess is missing there. If you would like to use issue forks to open this and work with issue forks and branches, there are certain steps that would appear here that you'd have to take first, and only then this part will disappear and you can actually do that. So that's the special explanation for issue forks. Then this is just a rundown of what it sees from the page. I'm not sure if that's necessary or not, that it shows you that it can see stuff. Then there's drop downs of whatever branches it finds on the page. There are drop down for patches that were found on the page, listed from the latest to the oldest. You get to choose which Drupal core you want to work with when you open this issue. You get to choose an optional profile. And there's a few more things that are going to be added soon, like PHP version, if it matters to you, which I'm trying to think how to kind of conceal, because chances are what's here is for most users, and then you kind of get advanced options or more specific options. Then the big button actually opened the environment for you. So my question here is how to make the experience we have here better.
So my first thought is that it's confusing to have the issue forks and the patches available at the same time. And you sort of have to decide whether you're going to work with the issue fork or whether you're going to work with the patch.
Yeah, one question, Benji, are we recording the sessions? Are we supposed to? Because I usually see a recording thing.
Yes, I see the little blinking red dot on,
Oh,
on the
great,
recording.
thank you.
I'm pretty sure we are. So I guess I would like to have some sort of toggle between working with issue forks or working with patches, and then have the relevant options displayed in either case. So for example, if you're going to work with a patch rather than an issue fork, then that little paragraph at the top is totally irrelevant.
Yeah, there's one more case that you can use it. If an issue you went to has only patches and you would like to use issue forks, by choosing both, it would help you eliminate a lot of writing different commands that would enter this new branch you just created and apply the patch already. So it's just ready to do git commit already for whatever was in the patch. So that's like a third option that's sometimes possible when someone want to take whatever's in the patch and put it in a branch.
But that's especially useful when working with a module that hasn't been made Drupal 9 ready yet. If you have an issue fork rather than a patch, that makes the changes to the info.yaml file. Then it's easier to apply it with the composer. So that's one use case for that option, converting patches to issue forks.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is this information useful here? Should we get rid of it because it doesn't add? I guess with one specific, well, So you could open this issue, this extension also on the module page. And then there are two distinctions between the module version and the core version, which I guess is gonna also add another dropdown.
Yeah, it would be. I had some similar thoughts, but it would be. I'd be curious as to what happens if you selected a. Well, no, I was going to say if you selected a different version of core, but then it would just presumably apply that merge request or patch to that version or something. Like, if you have a particular branch, presumably you can't then choose a different version of core because the core comes with that branch.
Yeah, I think branch is the core as well, in a way. When you're working on core issues.
Yeah, so maybe if it's a Drupal core issue, maybe you don't have the Drupal core version option because that, or maybe there is
when
a
you
use
have a
case for it.
branch. Is that what you're saying? When there is a branch, then not to show it?
Well, if this is a Drupal core issue, if you've got a branch selected, if the branch is already targeted at a specific version, then like you wouldn't then need to select a different version of core.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But again, I don't know if like I was at first when I first used this, the ability to select a branch and a patch kind of threw me for a second.
Threw you off, yeah. It might
as you
maybe
explained
I'll
it was
move it to the advanced options of I'm interested in, putting a patch in a branch and only then seeing it maybe both options because of that.
Yeah, I think you could have like a simplified view and then like an advanced view almost where like the option of you like radio buttons you select I want to view a branch or I want to view a patch and then it will give you those options, but then this feels like more of an advanced view where you just get all of the options and you can do whatever kind of thing.
Yeah. And another option that I think gonna happen soon is similar to what you see here on my screen. If the blue stuff is come from another extension called Dreditor that actually inject these elements into a Drupal page. So I thought in a similar way, I could, next to branches, just give the relevant dropdowns, because maybe I only need to ask about install profile here when you want to open it with DrupalPod. Or if there was a patch, just like we have here, the blue buttons, just ask for, so someone can, next to a patch, see a button that is much more straightforward as opposed to give you all the different options.
Yeah, putting
that probably makes sense.
would be a great improvement.
Oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
I said putting it in context would be a great improvement that reduces the number of choices you have to make and the number of drop-down lists.
Yeah, my question would be on this is depends on the versions people want to work on. Like it could be that 10 is coming up and maybe we need to update. Now, the patch was made to 9.3. Many chances that it even works on 10 because nothing much change between there. Like how do we help people? The two options I see in core when working on core is that Drupal core version and the install profile option. Unless, one idea I think now, would it help or maybe more confusing if these options would kind of fly out as you scroll down, and because you make this decision once, like I wanted umami and 9.3, and then you choose the specific patch.
Well, here's a slightly different idea. suppose you make it a two-step process. So instead of selecting a bunch of things and then clicking Open Dev Environment, suppose you make some initial choice, like I maybe just a single button. I want to open Gitpod for this, or maybe a choice between I want to work with an existing issue fork, I want to create a new issue fork, or I want to work with a patch. Just some simple choice. And then when you click Open Dev Environment, you go to a new window, some preliminary work starts going on in the background, and you're presented with the additional choices. And that new page, you might borrow some of the ideas from Simply Test Me, which also went through a recent design overhaul, and makes a lot of the same choices. So
like separate it into another screen so I'm starting with patch 3 and clicking on this, getting another screen where I get to choose more of the advanced options, or instead of on this screen.
yes, so for one thing, if on the initial screen you already choose I want to work with a patch or I want to work with an issue fork, then the next screen will just have the appropriate options for either patches or issue forks.
Okay. Yeah, I think with the Simply Test Me, there's like you all of a sudden have like all the options. And here I try to help people do more of the like 95 or more % would need just tell me which core option you want. Even that this should be by default, that's like a little bug in the extension. It should read this, and at least by default, you don't even need to worry about that, because it's, it can read it from here.
And then the other thing to consider with the things you show, for example, there was this informational text that the project type is project core. Is that actionable? And if it's not, maybe you just don't need to show it.
Right. Yeah, I believe all these things that are in bold text, they're not actionable. It just what the extension was able to read from the page. It never changed. It's part of the page unless you edit the issue and change something there.
So if it's not actionable, then why are you showing it?
Well, historically, probably it was a debugging session.
And does that become less relevant anyway if you're going to contextualize the links to get this started?
I hope so. I mean, I've noticed a lot of issues with the pop-out, because sometimes if people click somewhere else and then they open this and it kind of forget the choices, which is also a problem. And what I love in embedding it in the page is that people need to think less of, oh, where was that extension that I need to click on? So if they installed it already, chances are they want to work with it. Simply similar to the editor, they'll just have a button right next to something that is relevant, whether it's here, the branches, maybe something on top, and to specific patches.
Yeah, I think that would really help off. I remember you showed me Drupal pods some time back, and then there was a big gap between me using it the next time. And I must admit, I spent some time trying to find it on the page first. So, yeah.
Trying to find, can you say again? You tried to find what?
I spent some time trying to find the Drupal pod link on the page first.
Oh, yeah.
I recalled that it was an extension.
Yeah, so that would be a good. Yeah, are there other things that can be done, or maybe options that are missing? Like, so for example, assuming 95% people like it, I am installing Claro as admin theme anyway, if you choose any install profile. I'm installing the Vel module and the admin toolbar module. I want to add an option like, don't give me the extra fluff, but probably in the advanced option, because I do think that most people that want to open it would benefit from these improvements, as opposed to they work specifically on the toolbar without admin toolbar.
Yeah, it's probably good to have that as like an advanced option, because if you're on an issue with it, you're making improvements to the toolbar, and which I have been, and you want to test it out. It's like, well, maybe you don't want admin toolbar to be installed on it. So yeah, probably a good.
Yeah. So this just became because like chicken and the egg here, and improvement were faster and extension went behind.
Yeah.
And a new thing I'm going to add, because the speed of Drupal going to improve tremendously very soon, to just a few seconds, as opposed to like 2 minutes or 3 that you need to wait now. There's going to be an option of whether your issue has to do with installation, like Umami is. Like changes in Umami, you'll only be able to see them if you apply the patch and then install a new site. But most of things, I believe, are actually happening. You can make that change after. The difference is we can save time from people that they don't need to wait. So there's going to be this option of, is this related to installation or not? If it is, there's going to be additional time, because now you need to wait for the site to install. Umami can take like 60 seconds or 70, I think. And if not, it's 2 seconds. So it's important, I think, to a lot of people are not working on Umami, and they'll benefit from that speed.
Well, let me just hop in here. I promised to keep an eye on chat. Clayton had to say goodbye, and Antonia mentions that she uses Dreditor as well and loves the fact that it injects the buttons into the page.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I wasn't sure. I know Drupal using, I forgot the name of the component. It's like half button or drop down button. That there's an actual button, and then there's like a little triangle for additional options that appear next. I'm not sure yet if, which component should I use? How much space would that Drupal pod addition gonna add? Yeah, still thinking on that. Would love ideas.
Antonia asks if it's a split button.
I think that's what it's called. Yeah.
I know in the Drupal admin UI we call it a drop button, but that's maybe not generic.
I wonder if there's an opportunity for you to work with the people who make the Dreditor extension to agree on a standard like menu that appears in it for both extensions. So like, or any other relevant extensions, so that like there's some kind of almost like you get one button and you can drop it down and you get all of the things that modify, like the Dreditor buttons or the Drupal pod buttons, or, just maybe there's something to avoid.
Yeah,
adding
consolidate, like I have 10 options. Yeah, I don't know if, I'm not sure about the Dreditor status of if it is being updated or not. I don't remember if the simply test buttons are working because of the new one. And I think even review now with GitLab integration, I'm not sure what's going to happen with that. It seems like Drupal Association is trying to move everyone into issue forks. But these are just guesses. But yeah, that's a good idea to find a way to, if someone has both, still not to be overwhelmed.
Offer, if people have ideas after the meeting, is there a link where they can comment?
Yes, thank you. We open an actual project in Drupal.org now, so it can feel more like home. And there's like documentation efforts happening now, which is great. You can see it
So the
here.
URL would be drupal.org/project/DrupalPod.
Yeah, that's the I sent in the chat. We have an initial documentation for helping people finding and all that. So yeah, issues about improvement to the extension by implementing buttons inside. It's active development and happening, and I'd love ideas and suggestion of how to make things better for people.
Have you tried using the Drupal pod extension while you have a Drupal pod issue open?
Yeah, that's how I work with it.
So maybe it would help if you added an issue to the issue queue for the user interface changes that you're currently considering.
Nice, I will. Also, I'm not sure about the text of this button. If someone has ideas of better, like what text would make sense to people that they know when I click here, that thing, like, should I tell people this is Git pod? Is that